Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Rob Feld. Rob is a filmmaker and journalist. His recent documentary, Jesters and Fools, interweaves the social science of Duke professor Chris Bale and the observations of comedians Colin Quinn, Mo Amer, Jim Norton, Rosebud Baker, Nathan McIntosh, and Dean Edwards to reveal the truth that America, and I love this, thank you for doing this, man, is not nearly as polarized as our media landscape would have us believe. Rob's first dramatic short film, Love Lots of It, starred Campbell Scott, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, and was acquired for distribution. The second short film he directed, Sandcastle, had its international premiere at the TIFF Kids International Film Festival. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Rob Feld.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Man, thank you so much for being my guest today.
No, thank you. This is great to chat.
And so for our listeners and viewers, you and I met in New Hampshire a couple months ago at the National Governors Association gathering up there. And I want to get your take on this, Rob, because, and I've talked about this with other guests on the show, but I mean, there were hundreds of people in New Hampshire from different political ideologies, all different walks of life, all over the nation, saying, we have got to get away from this toxic polarization. And I'm sitting there going, this is beautiful. This is what America wants to see. And then come home and we saw what happened in that House of Representatives with the battle over the Speaker of the House. And I'm like, so what we just saw in New Hampshire is exactly what people want to see. What we saw in the House of Representatives is exactly what the majority of people don't want to see. You know, what's your take on that?
I mean, look, the incentives are all wrong, and we live in a mass media culture. So, you know, what gets covered, the most hyperbolic, extreme versions of ourselves, is what, you know, we get transmitted through these screens that we have, be it our phone, be it our television, because if it bleeds, it leads. The algorithms find that, certainly, and our natural psychology goes towards the most extreme. It's exciting. It pumps up our sense of self-righteousness or vitriol. And so we're attracted to it. And then our political figures, our media figures see that and they respond to it. And some of them will even say, I think, you know, that they feel forced to respond to the most extreme, you know, minority of voices because they are the loudest. And not all of them want to follow that path, but they're kind of forced into it, they feel.
You know, but I've often said on here that, you know, leadership is not, you can't lead by placating the vocal minority because you can't lead to an extreme. I mean, leadership is about bringing people together on common ground, you know, for the greater good in my book. You know, that's what good leadership looks like to me. So what we're seeing in the extremes in politics, it's almost like they're only concerned, some, not all, but it's to be reelected. And I'm like, so you're placating the vocal minority in order to keep your job, you know, in political office, which to me, is that really good character or good leadership? I don't think so.
No, we don't have leadership, you know, across the board. We have, I mean, look, we know what it takes to win an election, unfortunately, and you need the base, especially if you look at how, you know, our primary system is structured. Most people don't vote in primaries, and then they get frustrated that they don't have candidates they like. Who votes in primaries? The most motivated, you know, extreme personalities tend to go out for the primaries. And then, you know, and so to placate that base, candidates either change themselves or change their message, or those natural personalities are the ones who get elected. And then those are the choices we face, and no one's happy with them, but it's on us. Look, ultimately it's on us in a democracy to get out and demand better and support the people who are not the clickbait politicians, but who actually reach and try and find solutions.
Well, I want to talk to you and get your take on this too. So you're a journalist as well. So I'm 56 years old. I'm probably older than you, but I grew up, and Walter Cronkite, the anchorman for CBS, was the most trusted man in America. But Cronkite always said, the role of the journalist is to hold a mirror up to society and let people make their own decisions. But I was thinking about that with regards to your film, Jesters and Fools. That's really kind of what comedians do, is they hold up a mirror to society, which your film does that so well, and just saying, look, people, this is the situation we're in. So what is your take on that, being a journalist? I mean, I don't think there's any journalist on any network that would be called now the most trusted person in America.
Yeah, look, it's true. I mean, there's reasonable debate to have around, how unbiased, we all bring our biases in, and there's no question. And to every discussion, whether you're a journalist or not, I think that, being clear about your biases and doing your best to begin at kind of a first principles approach. Let's begin with what we just know to be true, and not pander to what we think an audience wants to hear. And in terms of comedians, look, the best of them, they're humans, they're fallible, but the best of them is absolutely fire in every direction. And that's who I try to choose. They have credibility because they are willing to fire in every direction. And that is something I think that might be lacking in a lot of journalism right now, is that the financial incentives to stay afloat had meant that so many had to find a niche audience. And so they pander to that audience, be it on the right or the left. And they don't show them things that they may not want to hear, or they frame things in a way that they think they want to hear. And comedians, the best of them, and I think the ones I chose, don't have those sacred cows. And they will, say, hey, look, maybe I'm on the left, but those guys are hypocrites, and I'm going to fire at the left if I so choose.
Yeah. Well, and that's leadership. But I was talking to somebody about it the other day. I was talking to somebody last night. Dwight David Eisenhower had a saying about speaking truth to power. And I think that's what, particularly the comedians in your film do, but that's what I try to do. And I had a speaking engagement recently, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "You're saying things that politicians will never say." I said, well, one, I'm not a politician. I never was a politician. I'm happily independent. But two, I can say these things, and these things need to be said. Just this path that we're on with extreme polarization, it is not sustainable. And more people need to be speaking up. But one of the coolest things so I connected you with Scott Mackey, young man who's an author, that I'm connecting all these creative people like yourself doing amazingly creative, cool stuff in the arts and film and music. And I think that's really going to be one of the things that develops this movement that we're all a part of, because arts are the connective tissue of our society.
And beyond, and even more broadly, media, right? I mean, in ways, I think that we are fighting a media war because of so much of what's behind our mutual animosity in this country or polarized animosity, is that we see flawed versions of each other. We see extreme versions of each other and mistake that for being the average, when in fact it's not. But we see each other through our media. Most, people are so even geographically sorted these days. It's pretty rare that you may interact with someone for any period of time who just disagrees with you on something. So your view of someone on the other side, if you will, is through social media, et cetera, of various kinds. So I think we need to fight bad media or incorrect media with a more truthful, a better media. And that's arts, that's, in pockets, journalism, certainly. Yeah.
But I've often told people, so I spoke to a professor at Georgia College this morning. They've invited me to speak to their leadership school. But I've said, I believe people will go to an alternative if they're given an alternative. So when I ran here, I never went negative. I never said bad things about my opponents. I'm like, if I can't run on my own vision or my own track record, I've got no business running. But so when my book first came out, The Changemaker, The Art of Building Better Leaders, so it's about leadership. But people assume because I'm a former politician, it was about politics. But I told a guy, and I was telling this leadership professor this today, a guy said, so what's at the core of your book? When I had a speaking engagement, I said, it's that you can maintain your character and integrity and treat everybody with dignity and respect in leadership positions, even in politics, and still be successful. And the guy goes, well, I can't wait to read it because I don't think that's possible. But, I think the mainstream media, if there is such a thing, people are starting to tune it out. So what alternative can we provide? That's the key to me. And I'm like, I just don't think, I know that fear is a powerful motivator, but I think people are sick of being made to feel afraid, and to dislike their neighbors or, be painted into camps. I'm like, because I see what you're doing in response to it. People want better than what we've got.
I think the response the film's gotten so far, I think that's true. And any data will tell you that the vast majority of us are not polarized in that way. We are much more moderate individuals, be that politically moderate or just temperamentally moderate. We don't care to go, all out war with our neighbors. And we're happy to talk to them. In terms of, we need a mainstream media. I don't know what that can look like right now, but the great thing about the Cronkites, not that there were multiple, but is that we had a common touch point, or at least many of us who were enfranchised to it did, and that gave us at least a baseline. But when we are through media this fragmented on what is true, and we don't want to see each other in a nuanced way. We want to see each other as these flat two-dimensional figures. It doesn't lend itself. And so I don't know what the solution is. Media, and I don't know how you combat the technology. The technology allows us all to have our own windows into the world. How you bring that together, I agree people are exhausted by this, but it is quite the uphill battle to push back against technology.
It's interesting. So being invited to come speak to the leadership school at Georgia College, I was telling this professor this morning. So when my book first came out, I had a 20-something-year-old reporter say, well, don't you think that appealing to the middle is kind of lukewarm? And I said, no, I actually believe that bringing people together on common ground is pretty damn cool. But I thought about it. For a 20-something-year-old reporter, this is all extreme polarization is pretty much all she's ever known.
It's true.
But I'm like, I am so excited to be able to go speak to these leadership students because I'm like, growing up, I had statesmen in both parties that I admired. And I'm like, for your students, who are they looking to now politically? But I want to be able to speak to them and say, you can do it differently. And I believe change starts at the local level, but you don't have to be negative and caustic and, make people more afraid of the other guy than they are of you. There is a better way.
There is. And look, you've just pointed out we have a generational issue, right? And that is that if you're below a certain age, you never saw anything else. You never saw anything but a pretty toxic conflict. You grew up, you came into this new media environment, and you have been taught that perhaps as a journalist, your job is less to report and more to shape minds. And that is, I think, a fundamental shift in our view of journalism. And even as a documentary maker, I hope what I do is turn the camera on and let people express and not, express what's on their mind and not shield some difficult things. And, if the other thing about journalism is that, many new journalists are going right into major newspapers rather than doing local beats and working their way to the New York Times, the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journals. And you lose a great deal of perspective. You lose a view of the country. You've come right out of the academy into the New York Times. You have not lived, and you've seen very little of the world, and you will probably see conflict as the thing you're supposed to cover.
It's interesting. For me, when I was in office, I didn't view the press as the enemy, because I think it's that curiosity that connects us all. So I would talk to young reporters, and I'll never forget a young lady named Lindsay Garner, who was a reporter for our CBS affiliate, who actually interviewed me on Christmas Day after James Brown passed in 2006. But Lindsay and I had a great relationship, as I did with lots of young reporters. But she said, look, I'm fresh out of journalism school. She said, I don't understand what a millage rate is. So I would take and educate these young reporters. And I'm like, thank you for having the vulnerability to say that. She's like, we're sitting in the newsroom, and it's like two 20-something-year-old girls, and we're reporting on government when, we've just started paying taxes ourselves. So I think it's incumbent, call it mentorship. But for those of us that do understand this stuff a little bit better, to take the time to help educate these young journalists, they always appreciated it when I was in office, and they still do.
No, look, asking questions is the most powerful thing you can do as a person, as a journalist, as anything. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and you've got to steepen stuff and be mentored. And I mean, look, there's also many senior reporters. It's the financial structure. Many senior reporters can't afford to be journalists anymore and left. And so you end up with less experienced journalists having serious beats, and they don't know how things work. And journalism has changed in other ways. I mean, it wasn't always such a professional class. It wasn't people who went through journalism school from an Ivy League school to a top journalism school and then to a paper. I mean, these were people who maybe had high school educations and then went to a local paper and had beats and were smart and capable and they lived. It's a very different type of reporting now.
It's interesting to me, though, and getting back in the curiosity, I am very hopeful going into 2024.
Because you're the only one.
But I'm out there, throughout the community. I don't exist in a silo, and I'm talking to people, and I'm seeing what you're doing, and I'm seeing, what my friends in the arts are doing. I'm seeing, 500 plus bridging organizations active in the U.S. that are doing outstanding work. There is hope for our future, but it's so easy to paint with a broad brush. So I was talking to this couple last night, and I was talking about my hope for the future because I'm so engaged with the younger generation, our friend Manu Meal from Bridge USA. But they say, well, the younger generation's lazy and they're at all this. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. And these folks are in their 70s and like perfectly nice people. I said, what is your sample on that? How are you making that statement? How many young people do you actually ever engage? Well, our friends' grandkids. I'm like, so you're judging an entire generation based on interaction with 20-something-year-olds. How do you do that? But talking to this professor at Georgia College, he said, when people say, I'm not hopeful for future generations, he's like, come talk to my students. And I said, AI scares the hell out of me. But I was talking to somebody yesterday and I said, but it will never take the place of human conversation. And people say that younger generations are always on their phones. They don't know how to communicate. I'm like, yes, they do if you engage them. And he said, it's almost, let me show you the art of conversation. And I'm like, I think everybody enjoys a good conversation. But it's easy to write them off and say, they're not engaged. They're on their phone. They don't care.
Look,
I was Generation X, and we were shoegazers and lazy too. It's every generation's lazy.
Yeah, look, I don't know that that accusing the younger generation of being lazy is our greatest problem. And I don't think they are lazy. I think that, it is certainly incumbent upon everyone to have conversations. I have 2 little girls. They will not have phones until they are significantly older. I keep them away from screens, frankly. I don't think that this, typing with your thumbs, is actually a way of communicating. They read a lot and we talk all kinds of things. They're little philosophers, is what they are, for better and worse. But, I do think that it is incumbent upon older generations to give better examples, and certainly our political elites. And where I do have hope is, look, you're right. All polling, and if you just talk to people, which is what the comedians I worked with will say, they say, I travel the country. I talk to people in little clubs. I don't see this polarization that you see through media, right? So, but the problem is that as media increasingly becomes our truth or our sense of truth, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more I think those people over there hate me, the more fear I'm going to feel towards them. This is Chris Bale's work. And the more I'm going to then feel animosity towards them. And so what the hope of the film is to be kind of a rallying point for more centrist or moderate personalities to find, to relate to give the middle an identity, which it doesn't have, right? And help people find each other to go, you know what? I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. Those people on the extremes are the minority. I don't need to cede all ground to them. Yeah. And so if the film helps people as they pass it to each other and enjoy it, whatnot, if it helps them find each other and find some standing to not disappear from conversation, then I think we've won a small battle.
It's very interesting to me, though. I don't want to get your take on this. So one of the thing I hear about the bridging movement, which we're a part of, and somebody said that we ought to call ourselves bridgers, like burners for Burning Man. I kind of like that. But it's, you guys just want everybody to sit around and sing Kumbaya. And, I'm like, no. In New Hampshire, we saw it, people of differing ideology. I'm like, we have to have constructive debate. That's the only way you're going to get progress in the world. But it's interesting because I think most of the people that say that are probably on the extremes. And so if we're bringing people together on common ground, we're cutting into their market share. But the reality of the situation is the extremes on either end, that's who's given the litmus test and saying, you got to be like us to be one of us, where we're encouraging open debate and encouraging people, of differing viewpoints to come together and have a conversation. And I'm like, that's pretty cool, because I'm like, as far as I know, you cannot grow as a person if you're only ever around people that look like you, act like you, and think like you. And that to me is really boring.
I agree. It's boring. It's intellectually lazy. And look, in a democracy, it is our responsibility to make our best cases for what we think is right, what we think is best. You do want to approach that with intellectual humility, though, right? There's that great question, tell me more. I want to hear what you think. Why do you feel that way? And after you've downloaded everything on me, then I can share my thoughts with you and we can talk. If there's an interest, right? If your only interest is just in beating me, berating me into a corner with your viewpoint, then I can't have a conversation. But people of goodwill, which I do believe is most people, most people are honestly, they're just trying to make it long enough to die. I swear to you. You're like, they just want to do their job, raise their kids, be left alone, and feel as little pain as possible during their lifetime. They're not trying to oppress you. They're not trying to beat you into submission. And if we approach each other in that way, hey, I understand you have a humanity and you have a point of view. Maybe I think you're wrong. Let's talk it out. Most people can get to some degree of compromise. That doesn't mean we'll find agreement, but we can compromise enough to move ourselves through history together in a healthy democracy. And that's what I fear we're not doing right now.
Well, I just think, there's something out there at the grassroots level, right? And I do think we're in the majority, but I'm like, how do you galvanize that spirit? Because it's there. I did talking to this professor. I said, Donald Trump did not create, he's not the root of all evil. He tapped into something that was already there. But I believe, because I did it here in Augusta, I'm like, if you provide people hope and lead by bringing people together, people believe in the power of community. And we live in this lonely society now, but I think people do want better and they want to come together. And so it's, how do we give people that forum going into next year to say, I want to get with this group. I want to get with the bridgers or the builders, because I don't want to be a part of that negative, stuff that's just sapping my spirit. I want spiritual nourishment instead of that crap.
Look, it has to happen, I think, in small personal ways. Once you're at, the national, even the federal, if we're talking government level, it's so broad and, it's nearly impossible. You can't speak to everybody and you speak very broadly. In your local politics, from your school boards, your dog catcher, you can, in your mayoralty, you can do that. And just in terms of your neighbors, you talk to your neighbors and, don't give them a scowl if they say something that you disagree with. You say, tell me more, and talk to each other. And I think there's a great fear now about engaging each other. And that just perpetuates the cycle. And because we're afraid if I say something, that person, my neighbor, is now going to hate me. They're going to think something terrible about me. I'm a this, I'm a that. And that shuts down conversation, which shuts down a democracy. It shuts down community. The reason I made the film was, I just had a pain for, I think there's a loss of American community. And that keeps coming back to me. And that will shatter us.
Yeah. I saw something, where our former president, who we probably know his name, but said he was going to lead America back from hell. And so I'm sitting there talking to people, in a restaurant. I'm like, does this feel like hell to you? I'm like looking at what's going on in Israel and the Ukraine, but you're saying that America is hell? I'm like, I met a guy from Morocco this week who is a naturalized citizen. Went through the citizen. He said, this is my country now. And he said, so I have people from Morocco say, oh, America's so horrible. He's like, no. You're believing what you're seeing in the media. Come visit me in America and I will introduce you to all these wonderful people who are my friends. But that I can get that. But I'm like, that he is so excited to be an American. I did not know, but I've often said that people that become citizens, I went to a lot of the swearing in ceremonies when I was in office. They know more about the U.S. than most U.S. citizens. So I did not realize until my new friend told me yesterday. He said, "You know what was the first country to recognize America as an independent nation? Morocco." I'm like, I didn't know that. But I said, man, I've always heard such cool things about Morocco. I want to come sometimes. He goes, I will go with you so I can show you our history. So apparently the first university in the world, I think, or one of the first, was founded in Morocco. And I think he said it was like in 80 AD, and it was founded by women.
It's a beautiful country.
Oh, yeah. But I'm like, so all of this, but it's like I tell people, I love talking to Uber drivers. And a number of years ago, I had an Uber driver from Iran whose wife was going to medical school here in Augusta. And I said, hey, man, he's 20-something years old. I was 40-something at the time. I'm like, hey, man, how are things in Iran? He goes, oh, our politics are awful. And this was when, it was President Trump was still in office. I'm like, we hear that in America a lot. But in a 30-minute Uber drive, I like when he dropped me off, I'm like, man, it's so good to know that, a Muslim from Iran and a Christian from Augusta, Georgia have more in common than we have differences. And we just had this great conversation in a 25-minute car ride.
You can't believe what you see on your phone. And certainly if you want to hear, it's very easy for America to, it's kind of a sport for us to cut ourselves down. But, you want to hear who appreciates America and what it has to offer. It's so much more frequently immigrants from the people I talk to. Look, my wife and her family came here as refugees from the Soviet Union, some time ago. And, they are on a daily basis so grateful for the life they were able to build here from nothing. Mo Amer, who appears in the documentary, talks about he came here. I believe, if I remember right, he grew up. He was born in Iraq. His mother took him and his brother here, and they settled in Texas. And he will talk about how the diverse experience he has there. He's like, look, I travel. He's like, I'm grateful for what I have here. I traveled the country as a stand-up. I never had problems with people. My neighbor, he talks about his redneck neighbor who calls himself Redneck Dave or something like that. I forget. But, he's like, he believes what he believes, but I love him. And I love his kids. And he's like a brother to me. And he's the first one to say, the opportunity he was given in this country. It is very easy for us to sit here, as comfortably as many of us do, or even, most of us do compared to other places in the world. And for all of the faults that every human endeavor has, I think this place has a great deal, if not the most, to offer people on the planet. And we should take a minute to remember that sometimes.
Well, it's, as I say, I don't exist in silos, but I think maybe what we're tapping into, and it's, how do we get all these bridging organizations and all these creatives and everything? We just need to have a big party and invite everybody. So I've said, I'd love, music is so powerful. I'm like, I love the Foo Fighters. Let's get Dave Grohl to play a big concert and invite everybody. But there is there is a hunger for hope out there. And I feel it wherever I give a speaking gig. And I'm like, I hope I'm a living, breathing example of hope, because I survived cancer this year, and I probably was not, most people wouldn't have thought that was going to happen. So I'm like, but dude, I did. So there is hope, but I tap into it every place I go. When I start talking to people, they're like, thank you for saying this. Thank you. And I'm like, there are more of us than them. But I tell people, to making the movement, you can be irreverent and, and still be edgy and still be cool. And I continually say, I'm like, that's how I sell the movement to younger people. I'm sticking it to the man. I grew up a punk rock fan. I'm like, the status quo is extreme polarization. So if we're going to rebel against anything, I think it is great to rebel against that. I'm not going to say it's the enemy, but it is, it's a cancer on the face of our nation, and we need to cure it. And
yeah, look,
comedy is a beautiful way to do that.
I think those guys, just by saying irreverent things every day, put little cracks in the edifice. And I don't expect every person to be. Look, I don't think everyone should be an activist. God knows. I think we have enough activists.
No.
I think that I just need everyone in their daily life to that great, quote, just be the change you want to see. Don't, just be open and be curious, and don't project bad intent onto people you meet who disagree with you. Ask them questions, and don't disappear. Don't disappear from conversation. That is really, I think, what we can do is if you hear someone saying something crazy, doesn't mean get into conflict with them, but maybe it's you add a little friction. Oh, well, I don't know if I really believe that. Add a little friction so it doesn't go by without some pushback, and let others see you do it. And then they too will go, I don't really think that's right either. And hopefully we can just start moderating tone towards each other.
Well, and, what you're doing through your movie and comedians holding up the mirror, that's what I try to do with this and in my speaking engagements, because it's like, I might have talked on here recently, but I was talking to the professor today. So about a month ago, I spoke to a group called the Young Professionals of Augusta, 20 and 30-something-year-old young professionals. So I talked to them about the Millennial Action Project, now the Future Caucus in Congress, headed up by our friend Layla Zidane.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that age range in Congress grew by 40% last year. So I told them all about that. I'm like, now, how many of you guys have ever heard of, the Future Caucus, or what was the Millennial Action Project? 0 hands went up. I'm like, but I told Layla, I said, but every one of them Googled you as soon as after I told them about it. But that gives me hope. And I'm like, that is so cool that there are actually people, young people in Congress that are working together in bipartisan fashion. I'm like, that shows me, and I've often said, I'm like, if I'm in Tennessee and my congressperson's a Republican that's working with a Democrat out of, wherever, someplace in the Northeast, to actually get legislation passed, I'm like, I'm thinking my guy or lady's got game, and that's the way when bipartisan efforts are disincentivized, and it's like you're told that if you reach across the aisle that we're going to primary you out. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't look. Why a party would try and fight a moderate on the other side to kick them out of office is beyond me. It seems so counterproductive. Or to take out someone on your own side for not being, purist enough. In terms of Layla's from Morocco too, actually. Funnily enough.
No, I told my guy yesterday about her.
She is. I mean, what they're doing is terrific. And we need to. The thing is, we need to see it. But who gets coverage? And there's a great chart of who gets media attention in Congress. Is it the people who are functioning and trying to move legislation forward, or is it Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ocasio-Cortez who get very little legislation, if any, moving forward, and they are the most hyperbolic voices around.
Yeah.
But they get exponentially more coverage, and because they're brilliant social media manipulators.
Yeah.
So that's who we see, and that's how we think of each other. And those are the look. I wouldn't know Marjorie Taylor Greene if from anything, but I now know her name because of that. But I couldn't tell you the congressmen from states that, most of them anyway, who aren't from my district, but I know who Marjorie Taylor Greene is because there she is on,
because she gets 10 times more coverage than anybody else in Congress.
Yeah, by far. Yeah.
Well, I did, as I say, I am so hopeful going into 2024, and it's just it's weird. But people look at me like, I'm like, oh, and this was my best year ever. They're like, the year you had cancer is your best year ever. You're weird.
It's the weird year I survived cancer is what.
Yes, the year I survived cancer, but call me different. But I'm like, it's just, I just think about the communal experience of a rock concert and how good that feels to just be around other human beings going, I guess holding up your cell phone. We used to light our lighters, but I'm like, that we are social animals. We're supposed to be in contact with each other.
It's so, but you need a focal point, right? You need that person on stage to collect you, and we don't have that. We just don't have that, and I don't know that structures will allow us to have that sort of top tier leadership at the top of the pyramid right now. I think it's much more. We've got to recognize each other, see each other first, and hopefully that trickles up.
Well, and that's the thing to me is I'm like, I tell people, because people, well, when are you going to run for office again? I'm like, man, I did it for 9 years and we established a really good culture in 9 years that went pretty much right out the window as soon as I left office. But I'm like, fundamental change. I'm like, don't put your faith in your politicians. That is subjugating your responsibility as a citizen.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said. And people sometimes are like guilty. They're like, man, I just can't do everything that you do. I'm like, you don't have to. We all have a role to play in changing the nation. This is just, it's what I do. It's a calling on my life. But I don't begrudge anybody else. I mean, if you're raising a wife and kids and trying to educate them and everything, it's a huge responsibility. I'm not necessarily tied down like that. But, we've all got to, just to treat with dignity and respect is a beginning. It starts with us.
It does start
Shameless
with us.
plug.
And God bless those guys. Look, the basic thing we can do is just approach each other with some amount of humility and humanity, and just not project ill intent onto whoever says something that you disagree with. Remember that they are people just trying to get from A to B, and they have reasons that are probably not evil for making the decisions that they make. And we're all just trying to figure it out. And one conversation is not going to change somebody's mind radically, but you can realize that they're of no threat to you for the most part. There's certainly of no direct threat. Maybe there's a policy they support that you don't like and that you think is a problem. You can certainly argue against it vociferously, but attacking the individual as being a terrible person for supporting whatever policy they think is the best thing, it's unhelpful. It's not truthful, and it's counterproductive. It won't get you anywhere. You cannot annihilate the people who you disagree with. They're not going anywhere.
No.
Not going anywhere. You got to work with them.
Well, I learned a very valuable lesson. I think it was maybe my first year of marriage. I'll have been married 25 years coming up in May. But like we do as dudes, my wife tells me that something's bothering her, and I naturally start trying to fix the problem. Well, you need to do this. She's like, I don't want you to fix my problem. I just want you to listen to me.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, oh, but that's what when you talk down to somebody, there's just a natural reaction to do that. But what I found in office was usually if somebody called me and they were angry, I would basically say, okay, let's just start off this conversation. I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect, and I expect you to do the same for me. Those are the ground rules. If you can't do that, this conversation is over. But usually when they agree to the ground rules, I just let them talk. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, they solved their own problem and they talked their way through it. And I didn't have to do anything. But I'm like, it takes much more strength to hold your tongue than it does to release it in anger.
It's
And
just good jujitsu,
Yeah,
take what comes at you. And
so I had a minister one time that said when he was a kid, he got in a fight at school, and his mom said, "Well, how'd the fight happen?" He said, "Well, it wouldn't have been a fight if he hadn't hit me." His mom said, "No, there wouldn't have been a fight if you hadn't hit him back." But it's just, and what I would tell people is I am so competitive, and people would say, "Why didn't you go off on somebody?" I'm like, because that is what people want you to do. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated if people purposely want to get a rise out of you, and I mean, that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene does, and other politicians. So I had experience in office. We had what was called hard drive gate. We had an elected official want the hard drive of our administrator. And so this just went on for, a month. So I had a reporter come in and say, "Hey, I want to ask you," I would always ask reporters, "What's the question?" And he's like, "Well, I want to ask you about, the hard drive again." I said, "Man, that story's over and done with." He goes, "No, it's not." I said, "Yes, it is. And all you're going to do, if I make a comment, you're going to take it and show it to somebody else and get their comment. And then it gets the whole thing going again. So I'm not going to let you, love you, man, but I'm not going to let you manipulate me into ginning up a story."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, you don't have to engage. And that's part of Chris Bale's work, who's, it underpins this documentary and, other work we're doing together, is to recognize the social media troll, to recognize the one who's trying, and you do not need to feel compelled to respond. It can listen, and I think, look, you want to. You see someone says something that tweaks you, and you want to respond because you think it's, it must be. But the fact is, it's just noise, and it just dissipates into the air if you don't engage it. And so, not every protest needs a counter protest. Not every tweet needs a counter tweet, and not every crazy thing needs a direct, contradiction. I know that I'm contradicting myself in some part. I do think some things need some friction, but I think that's more in the personal interactions that we have, because we do need to see that there is a moderate way of being. A counter protest, you can't counter protest moderately. All you can end up doing is shouting over the other people shouting. But in a personal interaction, you can kind of shrug and go, I'm not sure I'm totally on that, but I hear what you're saying. I think this is a problem, and it's a different way to be. It's a different way to interact with each other.
And that's I had a daily call-in radio show for 3 hours a day for about a year. It was on conservative talk radio, but it was the furthest thing away from that. We had local live music every Wednesday, but so 3 hours a day. There was like one guy that would call occasionally, blame everything. You let all these illegal immigrants in. And I'd be like, "How do you know that we have all these illegal immigrants in our community?" "Well, you can drive around to every job site." I'm like, "Have you checked their papers? Do you know if they're illegal or not?" "Well, no, but everybody knows that." So I'd let him talk, and then I'd be like, "Okay, man, thanks for your opinion." And I'd hang up. But in a city of 200,000 people, MSA of 650,000 people, I was a target 3 hours a day, but the vibe of the show was not such that it attracted the crazy people. I mean, it had a cool vibe, and people really enjoyed it. So I'm like, that's part of leadership, is you set the tone, and if you're not setting a cool tone that, but it's like you say, be the change you want to be, and, but set a good tone in your leadership as a parent, just in your community.
Yeah. Look, there's no question. Moths are attracted to flame, right? So if you, look at, I don't know, talk radio or cable news of, any variety, you go there to feed anger, to feed your sense of self-righteousness. and then you just get hyped up, and maybe you call in, maybe you whatever. And if that's the forum that lets you do that, you're going to do it. But if you see around your community that's not rewarded, which is another incentive on social media, or bad incentive, is the reward you get for saying something hyperbolic. You get pumped up, you get more likes, you get more shares, you feel good about yourself. You say something that increasingly hyperbolic, again, back to Chris Bale's work. There's the quote, or the stat that I love, which we use in the film. It's a couple years old now, so it's, but probably still within range. It's that it's 6% of all Twitter users are creating 73% of all political tweets. Right. So that means that this tiny percentage of people, and then 20% of Americans are even on Twitter or something. So this tiny percentage of users are making up all of the content, the politically based content. And then you look at Twitter and go, well, Twitter blew up today. Twitter didn't blow up today. A couple disaffected people who were getting promoted for saying something angry or hyperbolic, wrote some stuff, and then the media covered it. And all of a sudden it's a news item when it was nothing, or was an illusion. Yeah. And I think we all just, look, you can't catastrophize. You got to feel the ground underneath your feet, which is very different than looking into your screen, because the ground under your feet is not on fire.
Well, man, as we could talk all day, and I'm sure I'll have you back, and we will, or next time we see each other, we will. But as we get down towards the end, where can people find you and your film?
Well, the film is on JestersandFools.com. It's a great place there. Also, there are some resources for people who are trying to figure out, well, how can I bring better conversations to my place of work? Or there are different partners, from Braver Angels to Constructive Dialogue, and others who do terrific work. There are great resources for how can I find media that is more transparent about where its biases are, so that I can see a diversity of opinion. So that's a great home for things, certainly. JestersandFools.com.
Well, man, I highly recommend the film. It is awesome. And I appreciate all you do. I mean, you're an amazing, accomplished guy. So my last question is always, on a daily basis, what brings a smile to your face and puts joy in your heart?
Well, that's easy. I mean, it's my kids. They are, you see all the possibility of life in them as they discover something small, come out with some unique thought, perspective. It lights you up every time. They're hard work. Obviously, they're hard work. They're 6 and 10. It's a lot of work, but it's the toughest job you'll ever love, as they say.
So I will tell you, so my wife and I wanted kids, but it didn't work out. Accepted that. But I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So I now have 11 great nieces and nephews. Most of them are teenagers now.
Yeah.
I know I don't look that old, but I'm like, it's so freaking awesome because they are great kids, but I'm like, I've got 11 kids in my life and I don't have to educate any of them.
You don't have to, and you don't have to stay up with them. You get to give them back. It's a great job.
Yes, I get to give them back. And a bunch of them will be with us next week. But man, thank you so much, my friend. You're just, keep at it. You are making a huge difference in the world. And I appreciate it and look forward to working with you for years to come.
Thanks, man. We do what we can. Appreciate you so much.
That's all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.